CDC has quarantined the lower Midwestern region of the U.S.
Who was it?
Dunno.
In the sprawling, blood-soaked history of the Resident Evil universe, the narrative is almost exclusively dominated by soldiers. We know the classified dossiers of the STARS Alpha team. We know the kill counts of Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine. We know the government agents, the super spies, and the bioterrorism task forces. We are told that history is written by the victors, who fly away on extraction helicopters just as the sun begins to rise. But real history, the darkest, most uncomfortable history, isn't written by the people sent in to clean up the mess. It is written by the people who were never meant to survive it. Among the smoking wreckage of Raccoon City, one name stands entirely apart from the rest. She carried no badge. She had no military training. She had no extraction plan. Her weapon was not a Samurai Edge handgun, but a notepad, a lockpick, and a relentless obsession with the truth. Her name was Alyssa Ashcroft. And to understand the unimaginable tragedy that awaits her daughter, Grace Ashcroft, in the upcoming Resident Evil Requiem, we must first perform a psychological autopsy on the mother. We must go back to the beginning. Most players who experienced the PlayStation 2 era remember Alyssa as one of the 8 playable survivors in Resident Evil Outbreak. But her story, her true story, did not begin in the autumn of 1998. It began 5 years earlier, in a time when the word umbrella was still synonymous with pharmaceutical excellence and medical miracles. Let us rewind the clock to the spring of 1993. At 23 years old, Alyssa Ashcroft was already a rising investigative reporter for prominent local outlets like the Raccoon Press and the News Comet. Standing at 5 feet 9 inches, she was a striking, imposing figure. But her physical presence was nothing compared to her personality. The official lore files and character relationships established in the Outbreak series paint a picture of a woman who was notoriously abrasive, bossy, and hyper-competitive. She was a sore loser who often clashed with her colleagues. This ambition frequently put her at odds with other journalists in Raccoon City. In the summer of 1998, for instance, she famously scooped fellow investigative reporter Ben Bertolucci on an animal smuggling ring at the Raccoon Zoo. While Ben would later grudgingly admit, "You beat me to the scoop on the zoo story, not bad," their dynamic was strictly professional competition, 2 hounds fighting for the same scrap of meat. Yet, this loud, obscenity-laced exterior was a meticulously crafted armor. Official Capcom character profiles reveal that beneath her vanity, Alyssa harbored intense vulnerabilities regarding her physical appearance. She maintained a punishing weightlifting regimen and regularly consumed imported diet foods and vitamin drinks, her inherent journalistic skepticism constantly battling against her own somatic insecurities. She was human, flawed, brilliant, and deeply human. And it was this brilliant, skeptical mind that caught the scent of something foul in the ARKLAY mountains. While her colleagues were content covering local politics and RPD press conferences, Alyssa and her colleague, an investigative reporter named Kurt, were following a trail of corporate whispers. They were investigating rumors of illegal drug trials sponsored by the Umbrella Corporation at a secluded, private hospital deep within the ARKLAY forest. What they walked into was not a white-collar crime scene. It was the womb of a biological nightmare. Unbeknownst to the public, the Umbrella Corporation was using the hospital as a clandestine testing ground. Using a web of generic shell companies to bypass FDA regulations and obfuscate their financial trail, Umbrella supplied the hospital's director, Dr. Albert Lester, with an experimental, highly classified strain of the T virus known as TJCCC203. This wasn't the weaponized virus that would later destroy the city. The TJCCC203 strain was an oncolytic variant, ostensibly designed to aggressively target and cause apoptosis in cancer cells. Clinical reports recovered from the hospital ruins detail the horrifying reality of these tests. On March 14, 1993, a patient named Doug Frost was injected. Within 48 hours, his cancer was entirely eradicated. But by March 17th, his cellular structure violently collapsed, and he exhibited the first recorded symptoms of what the doctors called cannibal disease. Despite this catastrophic failure, Dr. Albert Lester was a man blinded by grief. His own wife, Dorothy Lester, was bedridden in the ICU, dying of a terminal heart condition. In a desperate bid to cheat death, Lester inoculated his wife with the TJCCC203 strain on May 20, 1993. By the time Alyssa and Kurt infiltrated the hospital under the cover of darkness, the facility was already experiencing a localized outbreak among the patients. In their desperate search for evidence, the two journalists pushed deep into the hospital's ward. When they breached room 201, the horror ceased being an investigation and became a slaughter. Kurt was ambushed. Alyssa was forced to watch, paralyzed by terror from the shadows, as her friend and mentor was brutally mauled and partially eaten alive by the fully zombified body of Dorothy Lester. This is the foundational trauma of the Ashcroft bloodline. But the true psychological thriller begins with what happened next. Alyssa managed to survive the night, but Umbrella's reach in Raccoon City was absolute. With the local police force, including Chief Brian Irons, deeply in Umbrella's pocket, no official charges were ever filed regarding the hospital. But Alyssa was deemed a critical threat to the company's operational security. Rather than simply assassinating her, she was subjected to an invasive memory suppression treatment developed by Dr. Greg Mueller, an Umbrella virologist overseeing the ARKLAY trials. Using experimental chemical agents and psychological manipulation, Mueller scrubbed the events of 1993 from her mind. They buried the death of Kurt, the cannibal disease, and the hospital beneath a thick, impenetrable fog of amnesia. They released her back into Raccoon City as a hollow shell of a witness. For 5 long years, Alyssa Ashcroft walked the streets with a gaping void in her psyche. She knew she harbored a deep, inexplicable hatred for corporate authority, but she couldn't remember why. She was a loaded gun with the safety permanently jammed. Until September 24th, 1998, the week the safety was finally clicked off. When the primary T-virus outbreak consumed Raccoon City, Alyssa was having a drink at Jay's bar. As the first wave of the undead shattered the glass doors, the suppressed survivor instincts within her immediately took over. This is where the genius of Resident Evil's ludonarrative resonance comes into play. In video games, How a character plays tells you exactly who they are. While other survivors relied on brute strength or medical knowledge, Alyssa relied on access and precision. She was the only character in the franchise capable of utilizing a specialized set of lockpicks, categorized as the I, S, W, and P picks. Consider the psychology of that mechanic. In a world of barricades, dead ends, and corporate cover-ups, Alyssa refuses to be contained. If Umbrella locks a door, Alyssa Ashcroft finds a way to open it. Furthermore, examine her unique combat discipline, the pot shot. In the middle of a chaotic melee, surrounded by the screaming undead, Alyssa's special move required the player to stand perfectly still, aim her weapon, and wait for a precise, critical hit alignment. It is a moment of cold, analytical zen in the middle of hell. She doesn't panic. She treats a zombie's skull the same way she treats a corrupt politician's alibi. She identifies the weak point, waits for the variable to stabilize, and executes. As the city burned around her, Alyssa navigated the collapsing urban infrastructure. But the cruel irony of the virus was that her path to salvation didn't lead her out of the nightmare. It led her right back to the source. In the legendary Outbreak scenario known as Flashback, Alyssa fled the military blockades by retreating into the ARKLAY mountains. Guided by a seemingly innocent old man through the foggy woods, the group crossed a decaying suspension bridge and found themselves standing before an abandoned, vine-choked building. The ARKLAY Hospital. The moment Alyssa's boots touched the linoleum floors, the chemical seals in her brain began to violently fracture. The déjà vu was nauseating. Flashbacks assaulted her vision. The sterile lights, the blood on the walls, the screaming face of Kurt. And then the true horror revealed itself. The old man who had guided them was Albert Lester. His mind had completely shattered under the weight of his grief and his own prolonged exposure to the virus. Wearing a black sack over his head and dragging a heavy blade, he now roamed the halls as the Axeman. He wasn't a biological super soldier. He was just a tragically broken human, hunting lost hikers to feed to Dorothy. Because Dorothy wasn't dead. Over the last 5 years, the TJCCC203 strain inside her corpse had mutated wildly, interacting with the local flora to create the huge plant, a colossal, building-sized botanical monstrosity that had consumed Dorothy's remains and woven itself into the very foundations of the hospital. For Alyssa, the battle through the facility wasn't just a fight for survival. It was an act of psychological reclamation. As she gathered Kurt's blood-stained notebook and the clinical reports, she pieced together the puzzle Umbrella had stolen from her. Injecting the plant's vascular system with a chemical serum and destroying its throbbing roots wasn't just a boss fight. It was an exorcism. When the plant's core finally withered, it regurgitated Dorothy's corpse. In a final act of macabre devotion, Albert Lester ceased his attack, embracing the remains of his wife, just as the hospital's ceiling, no longer supported by the mutant vines, collapsed and crushed him. The memory block was completely shattered. Alyssa remembered everything. The grief over Kurt's death, dormant for half a decade, ignited into a blazing inferno of absolute fury. On the dawn of October 1st, 1998, Alyssa Ashcroft secured a seat on one of the final evacuation helicopters. As the Chinook soared away from the city limits, she looked out the window. She watched the U.S. government execute Mission Code XX. She felt the shockwave of the thermobaric missile, a devastating fuel-air vapor bomb as it wiped Raccoon City from the map. There was no radioactive fallout. There was no nuclear ash. There was only the absolute scorching erasure of 100,000 souls and all the evidence of Umbrella's sins. Most survivors would have been broken by this sight. They would have wept. They would have sought a quiet corner of the world to hide in. But if you look at the final epilogue screens of the game, you don't see a victim. You see a woman sharpening her pencil. As the thermobaric clouds stretched toward the stratosphere, Alyssa Ashcroft realized that her survival wasn't a stroke of luck. It was an assignment. The scared survivor from 1993 had died in the fire. The whistleblower had just been born. October 2nd, 1998. The morning after the end of the world. The sun rose over the American Midwest, casting long, indifferent shadows over a crater that was still smoking. 100,000 souls were gone, vaporized in a flash of blinding light orchestrated by the United States government under Mission Code XX. The official narrative was swiftly manufactured and deployed to the media. A tragic incident, a necessary sterilization to prevent a localized biohazard from spreading. Most survivors of extreme trauma seek the comfort of oblivion. They hide. They try to forget. Leon S. Kennedy was immediately cornered by U.S. Stratcom, forced into government service under the threat of Sherry Birkin's safety. Claire Redfield went underground, flying to Europe to continue the desperate search for her brother. But Alyssa Ashcroft? She didn't pick up a gun. She didn't run to Europe. She went to war, using the only weapon Umbrella Corporation truly feared, the printing press. While the radioactive free ash of Raccoon City was still settling on the windshield of the evacuation chopper, Alyssa was already drafting the opening salvo of a conflict that would last for 5 agonizing years. She realized that you can shoot a zombie, you can blow up a tyrant, but you cannot shoot a corporate ideology. To kill Umbrella, she had to dismantle them piece by piece in the court of public opinion. This brings us to one of the most legendary artifacts in the Resident Evil lore, a document referenced in the epilogues of Resident Evil Outbreak. Published shortly after her escape, in a climate of intense government censorship, Alyssa released the bombshell article titled, "What is a BOW?" blowing the lid off this horrifying secret project. Let's analyze the historical weight of this text within the Resident Evil universe. Before this article, the general public believed the Raccoon City incident was a terrible but natural viral outbreak. The term bioorganic weapon was relegated to the realm of science fiction and conspiracy theories. Alyssa's article shattered that illusion. She defined the terminology. She categorized the horrors. She described the skinless, blind hunters known as lickers. She detailed the towering, trench-coated nightmares known as tyrants. She exposed the illegal experimentation that took place in the ARKLAY Mountains back in 1993. She wasn't just reporting the news. She was painting a target on her own back the size of a continent. Umbrella wasn't just a pharmaceutical company. It was a global superpower. They had private armies like the UBCS and the USS. They had politicians in their pockets. They had professional fixers who could make a death look like a sudden heart attack or a tragic car accident. Alyssa knew this better than anyone, but she refused to flinch. The publication of her article ignited a federal firestorm, leading to the commencement of the Raccoon trials, a grueling, multi-year legal siege. Alyssa didn't fight this battle alone. She found allies in the wreckage of the city. Yoko Suzuki, the timid university student and former Umbrella test subject who had her own memories wiped by Dr. Greg Mueller, stepped forward as a critical witness. Dr. Linda Baldwin, an Umbrella researcher who defected during the outbreak, provided the necessary technical testimony. Together, they formed an untouchable trinity of truth: the survivor, the victim, and the defector. For 5 years, Alyssa sat in sterile deposition rooms and federal courts, staring into the dead eyes of Umbrella's corporate lawyers. They tried to destroy her credibility. They called her hysterical. They dug into her past, attempting to paint her as a traumatized, vainglorious woman hallucinating from post-traumatic stress. But Alyssa had something their money couldn't buy. She had the undeniable, horrific reality of what she saw in the ARKLAY hospital. However, the history books only tell us about the Alyssa Ashcroft who stood defiantly in the courtroom. They omit the profound psychological battle she was fighting in private, a battle that fundamentally changes the emotional landscape of the upcoming Resident Evil Requiem. Sometime between the destruction of Raccoon City in the autumn of 1998 and the final legal verdict in 2003, the timeline dictates that a pivotal, life-altering event occurred. Alyssa Ashcroft became a mother. The birth of Grace changes everything we know about Alyssa's motivations. Before Grace, Alyssa was a hardened, cynical reporter willing to die for a story. She had accepted death beautifully on that helicopter ride out of Raccoon City. But after Grace, she became a woman who needed to survive. She was no longer just protecting the truth. She was protecting a bloodline. Imagine the suffocating pressure of those years. Alyssa is testifying against the most powerful, ruthless corporation on Earth, and then going home to a newborn baby. Think about the paranoia, the clicked phone lines, the black sedans idling across the street from her apartment. Every threat letter delivered to her door wasn't just a threat to her anymore. It was a threat to Grace. This harrowing environment provides crucial context for Grace Ashcroft's character design in Resident Evil Requiem. Capcom's developers have explicitly described Grace, now an FBI intelligence analyst in 2026, as an introverted bookworm who is easily startled and deeply aware of her lack of combat proficiency. She is the polar opposite of action heroes like Leon Kennedy or Chris Redfield. Why? Because Grace didn't have a normal childhood. She didn't grow up with fairy tales. She grew up with survival protocols. She was raised by a mother who likely checked the locks 3 times every night, a mother who scrutinized every crowded room for Umbrella hitmen, a mother who taught her that the shadows are always hiding something and that the truth is an incredibly dangerous thing to hold. Grace's anxiety isn't just a character quirk, it is the inherited trauma of the Raccoon trials. By 2003, the unthinkable finally happened. The verdict came down. Umbrella Corporation was found guilty on all charges of gross negligence and illegal bioweapons manufacturing. Their stocks plummeted into the abyss. The company was officially dissolved, and the global suspension of their business license served as the final nail in their coffin. It was a victory that should have felt like the ultimate triumph. Alyssa Ashcroft had done it. She had slayed the dragon with a pen. But for Alyssa, standing on the steps of the federal courthouse, holding the hand of her young daughter, the victory felt incredibly hollow. Her investigative instincts told her the horrifying truth that the general public was too blind to see. Umbrella was gone, yes. The logos were pulled down from the skyscrapers. But the research, the viral data, the biological samples, they didn't just evaporate. They leaked into the black market. The fall of Umbrella didn't end bioterrorism. It democratized it. Suddenly, terrorists, rogue states, and underground crime syndicates were bidding on the legacy of Raccoon City. The beast had been decapitated, but a dozen smaller, more insidious heads were already growing in its place. Alyssa realized that the world was about to become infinitely more dangerous. And now, she was famous. Her face had been broadcast on every news network. Her name was permanently etched into the public court documents. If she continued her public crusade, it was only a matter of time before a black market cartel or a rogue Umbrella loyalist decided to silence her for good. She looked at Grace, innocent, fragile, and completely unaware of the dark legacy she carried in her veins, and made the hardest choice of her life. The fearless reporter had to die so the mother could live. As the world naively celebrated the dawn of a safer era, and as the BSAA was formed to fight the new global war on terror, Alyssa Ashcroft packed her bags, took her daughter, and did the only thing she could to ensure their survival. She vanished into the shadows. But as we know, ghosts never stay buried forever. From 2004 to 2015, the Resident Evil universe underwent a massive geopolitical shift. This is what lore historians refer to as the Action Era. The world saw the rapid rise of the BSAA. We watched Chris Redfield fight the Las Plagas parasite in the sun-baked plains of Africa. We saw Leon S. Kennedy navigate the global bioterror attacks orchestrated by Neo Umbrella. Bioorganic weapons were no longer a dark secret hidden in the ARKLAY mountains. They were front-page news. They were sold in war zones to the highest bidder. During this entire chaotic decade, fans of the franchise constantly asked one question: where is Alyssa Ashcroft? Why wasn't the heroic journalist who exposed Umbrella standing on the front lines? The answer lies not in a lack of courage, but in a dramatic shift of personal priorities. The whistleblower had become a mother. We must understand this period, the silent years, to comprehend the hardened, deeply traumatized FBI analyst that Grace Ashcroft will become in Resident Evil Requiem. Alyssa knew that the remnants of Umbrella, the rogue researchers, and the black market brokers had long memories. A highly public life was a death sentence. Consequently, Alyssa and Grace lived off the grid. Their lives were likely a blur of cheap motels, pseudonyms, burner phones, and constantly checking the rearview mirror. While other children were learning to ride bicycles or playing in the park, Grace was learning how to spot a tail. She was watching her mother obsessively scan the dark web and track encrypted corporate records. Alyssa had traded her mainstream newspaper byline for the life of a shadow investigator. She knew that the BSAA was busy fighting the loud wars, the giant monsters destroying entire cities. But Alyssa was looking for the quiet wars. She was tracking the silent evolution of bioterrorism. And her relentless tracking led her to a horrifying realization. The biological arms race was changing. The industry was moving away from the necrotic flesh of the T-virus. They were moving towards something far more insidious, something undocumented. She began following the faint, bloody breadcrumbs of a new, unidentified threat in the bioweapons black market. An entity operating entirely without the loud, destructive footprint of Umbrella. This grueling investigation led mother and daughter out of the shadows and straight into the sweltering, rotting heart of the American South. Fast forward to the year 2017. Resident Evil 7, Biohazard, hits the shelves, revolutionizing the franchise and bringing it back to its claustrophobic, terrifying roots. Millions of players step into the shoes of Ethan Winters, desperately searching for his missing wife in the decaying, mold-infested estate of the Baker family in Dulvey, Louisiana. Most players were too panicked, too busy running from the unstoppable Jack Baker to stop and read every single piece of paper scattered around the filthy house. But in the main hall of the Baker residence, resting innocuously on a dusty table, lies the absolute smoking gun of our entire documentary. It is a newspaper clipping from the Dulvey Daily. The headline reads, "Over 20 missing in 2 years." The author of the article? Alyssa Ashcroft. Let us analyze this document with forensic precision, because the timeline is absolutely critical to the overarching lore. The date printed on Alyssa's article is January 19th, 2016. Let that sink in. Alyssa Ashcroft was investigating the Dulvey swamps a full year and a half before Ethan Winters ever arrived. She was there before the tragic Sewer Gators film crew was murdered. As we, the audience, know, the Baker family was slowly, agonizingly succumbing to the mind control of the E-Series bioweapon known as Evelyn, a project funded by an anonymous crime syndicate. While the local police dismissed the missing backpackers and tourists as runaways or victims of the treacherous bayou, Alyssa saw the terrifying pattern. She wrote about the ghosts in the swamp. She recognized the chilling similarities between the isolated disappearances in Dulvey and the early covered-up cannibal murders in the ARKLAY Mountains back in 1993. The geography was different, but the methodology was eerily similar. A secluded location, a marginalized population, a localized, controlled biological event. But here is the detail that elevates this from a neat Easter egg to a heartbreaking narrative prologue for Resident Evil Requiem. Alyssa was not alone in Louisiana. By 2016, Grace Ashcroft was no longer a child. She was a teenager, likely sitting right there in the passenger seat of their rental car. Picture the oppressive atmosphere of the Dulvey Bayou, the suffocating humidity, the smell of stagnant water and rotting wood. Alyssa is out in the field, interviewing terrified locals, taking photographs of the condemned marshlands, sensing that a new biological nightmare is taking root. And Grace is watching her. Grace is absorbing the tension. She is witnessing firsthand the grotesque reality of the bioweapons black market that her mother has dedicated her life to exposing. In Requiem, Grace is an FBI intelligence analyst. She relies on deductive reasoning, forensic analysis, and careful observation rather than brute force. Where do you think she learned those skills? She learned them in the field. She learned them sitting in the passenger seat in Louisiana, watching her mother poke a sleeping dragon. Alyssa's publication in the Dulvey Daily proved she was remarkably close to uncovering the truth behind the Baker estate long before the BSAA, or Blue Umbrella, ever mobilized. But what happened next remains one of the darkest, unsolved mysteries in the Resident Evil timeline. We know that Alyssa did not stay in Dulvey. 2 years passed. The exact details of Alyssa's movements between the publication of the Dulvey article in 2016 and the tragic events of 2018 remain heavily classified or entirely unknown. Did she uncover the existence of the syndicate that created Evelyn? Was she tracking a completely different remnant of Umbrella's research? Whatever she found, it was monumental, and it was dangerous. By the autumn of 2018, Alyssa's relentless pursuit of the truth led her away from the swamps of Louisiana and into the freezing, rain-slicked landscape of the Midwest. She was tracking a major lead, or perhaps she had uncovered something so radioactive that she finally became a high-priority target for assassination. Her investigation led her to a decaying, liminal structure sitting alone in the dark. A forgotten building where she and Grace booked a room for the night. A place called the Wrenwood Hotel. It was here that the legendary survivor of Raccoon City would face her final investigation. And it is here where the story of Alyssa Ashcroft violently ends, and the nightmare of Grace Ashcroft begins. As we prepare to step into the upcoming Resident Evil Requiem, the official police reports feel utterly hollow. The death of Alyssa Ashcroft isn't just a tragedy, it is the ultimate cold case, a puzzle box missing its final pieces. Instead of answers, we are left with a terrifying sequence of questions. When the power was surgically cut to the Wrenwood Hotel that night, and the phone rang asking for Miss Ashcroft, who was really on the other end of the line? When Alyssa and her teenage daughter Grace fled into the pitch-black hallway, they witnessed the hotel manager being brutally executed by a towering, hooded figure. But who was under that hood? Was it a hitman hired by a post-Umbrella syndicate? Was it a remnant of the Baker family incident? Or, as some deeply disturbed lore hunters theorize, could it have been a mutated ghost from her past? Someone like Albert Lester, the axeman of the ARKLAY Mountains, kept alive by corporate experiments. And then there is the ultimate mystery, the MacGuffin of the new era. In a desperate, final act of maternal sacrifice, Alyssa handed a thick, heavily redacted document to Grace. We see the terrified girl slide this dossier behind a heavy, oil-painted portrait bolted to the hotel wall. Alyssa then willingly ran into the darkness, drawing the killer's attention, trading her life so her daughter could survive. But what was in that file? What did Alyssa uncover that was so utterly devastating that a shadow corporation had to erase her from existence? For 8 agonizing years, the world moved on. The whistleblower was silenced. The file gathered dust behind a painting. Until the year 2026. Grace Ashcroft didn't break. She weaponized her trauma. Now an intelligence analyst for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, she sits at her desk, reviewing the gruesome photographs of the 4th victim of an unidentified disease. And this is where the new nightmare begins. This is where the trailers for Resident Evil Requiem deliver a psychological gut punch.
If this is about the report you asked for yesterday, it'll be ready in 3. No, 2 days, tops.
Put a hold on that for now. We found another body. One that exhibits the same pathology as the others we've been investigating. Now, I need a good technical analyst on this.
Okay.
I need your eyes on the crime scene. The Renwood Hotel. I know that's where your mother was murdered. Alyssa died 8 years ago. Perhaps it's time for you to face the past.
We have to ask ourselves, why? The FBI has thousands of field agents. Why send the traumatized daughter of the victim back to the exact room where her mother was slaughtered? Is Dempsey just a cold, calculating bureaucrat? Or is the Bureau compromised? Is Grace being walked into a trap? The mysteries only deepen as we look at the main villain of Requiem, the rotting ex-Umbrella researcher, Dr. Victor Gideon. When he captures Grace, he whispers a line that changes everything about the Ashcroft bloodline. Because my master made you who you are. What does that mean? Did Dr. Greg Mueller's memory suppression experiments on Alyssa back in 1993 leave a genetic footprint? Is Grace Ashcroft carrying a dormant anomaly in her DNA? Was Alyssa murdered because of what she knew, or because of what she gave birth to? We don't have the answers. Not yet. When Resident Evil Requiem launches, we won't just be playing a survival horror game. We will be finishing a 30-year-old investigation. With Leon S. Kennedy fighting his own terminal infection on one side of the Midwest, and Grace Ashcroft sneaking through the halls of the Renwood Hotel on the other. The sins of Raccoon City are finally coming home to roost. Alyssa Ashcroft didn't have a rocket launcher. She didn't have a government task force. She was just a woman with a notepad, a lockpick, and a refusal to look away from the dark. She spent her life fighting to expose the truth to the world, but she died alone in the shadows. Now, her daughter is going back into the dark to finish the report. This is the end of Alyssa's story, but it is just the beginning of Grace's Requiem. What do you guys think? Who is the hooded figure that killed Alyssa? Is Victor Gideon working for a resurrected Umbrella, or something worse? Drop your best theories in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the darkest corners of Resident Evil lore, smash that like button and subscribe. You've been listening to Lilith Sanctum. Until next time.